Good day, everyone. So we're going to be answering the question, how much does Yelan increase Kokomi's damage using Yelan's Ascension passive, the Adaptive Ease? In other words, the damage ramp that we're all familiar with. Now, if you look at the in-game description, you might be mistaken to think that if hypothetically your Kokomi did 10,000 damage, then if Yelan sort of increased her damage, then the 10,000, let's say multiplied by 50%, will now mean you do 15,000. And that is absolutely not the case. So we're going to sort of look into a bit of math and a bit of detail. Now, for you to really appreciate this video, you would need to have watched my previous video on where we actually explored the average sort of damage ramp that you can get, the average utilization. We did a bunch of simulations. We showed you different ways of running these sorts of simulations and so on. And basically, this sort of analysis gave us that on average, well, you expect 25.5, but there is a range depending on when you attack with Yelan. So this was quite a bit of a cool analysis, and we're going to take this to the next level. We're going to make it practical, because the final damage number that you see isn't actually going to be increased by 25%. It's more so going to be like half of that, and I'll explain why. But to explain why, we need a tool to do calculations. Now, I've got an Excel calculations, but I'm actually firing up the sort of Genshin Impact damage calculator here. This is not a website, so this is something I'm self-hosting here, running here in WebStorm, for those of you that are familiar with it. And basically, we've got a calculator. The stats that you see here on Kokomi, the artifacts, the Yelan here, all of these things are exactly identical to the Kokomi that I've got here in-game with regards to her stats and so on, barring a couple of rounding errors and the like. But yeah, so we've got a C1 Kokomi. These are her talent levels. I'm obviously on my alternative account, and we're going to be using for damage calculations Everlasting Moonclow at R1. So basically, how much is Kokomi going to do against a target like the Kairagi or like Masanori in this case? Well, given the fact that he's got about an implicit 10% hydro resistance, we can see that the calculator says we're going to do about these numbers. So 7706 on the first hit, 7591, and let's just get a feel for it. So let's just see what the actual in-game numbers are and whether the calculator is indeed correct. Spoilers alert, it is actually correct. So let me just sort of show you to inspire a bit of confidence. I'm just going to wait for him to attack. There we go. So there you guys can see 707, 759, and there we go, 86, 8145, and so on. So these are pretty much the numbers that you would have expected. They're exactly the same because the Genshin Impact damage equation is not really that difficult. So here comes the interesting bit. So what happens when we go and we activate the Yelan Ascension passive? Well, the moment I sort of click on this and we assume about 8 stacks. Now, 8 stacks means on average we're sort of assuming that all the damage increased by 29%. The calculator gives us 8981. Now, if you did a bit of quick maths, you would realize that 8981 and 7706, that's not really a 29% damage increase. So what is going on? Well, to understand what's going on, let's just look again what's happening in game. So here is Kokomi and Yelan. So here you'll see we're just going to attack, and this is like pre-recorded footage, by the way. So let's just quickly wait, and we're now going to swap into Yelan and start hitting the Kairagi. Once we got the particles for Kokomi, let's see. And here it is. So there's Yelan, there is Kokomi, and now we're going to start attacking. Now it's a bit of a mess because you just have all of these hydro sort of numbers going on. But in order to make sense of the mess, I actually compiled to you guys a bit of like all the damage numbers. So it's pretty simple to understand. Here at the bottom, this is what Kokomi would have done without Yelan, and this is what Kokomi would do with Yelan. Obviously, this last little number I couldn't read from in-game, so it's a bit of an estimate. It's more or less give or take, who cares. At the end of the day, this is the total damage number here, this is the total damage number right here, and we basically see that Yelan only increased Kokomi's damage by 13.21%. So the question is, how? You know, because theoretically we said 25.5, that's what we were promised. So the thing is, Genshin Impact is notorious for misrepresentation in the game. So when you read something that says increase by 50%, It's true, but you'd have to go and look at the Genshin Impact damage equation and find out where that 50% damage increase is actually being applied to. And to answer this question, we can actually now look at a bit of Kokomi calculations. So basically, the values you see here is exactly what I have in game. It's exactly what I have in the app. And you can basically see that if I take off Yelan's buff right here, we are going to get, oh, look there, 7706, which is precisely more or less the number here, or the 707 that you find in game. So basically what I did is I just did a manual calculation to sort of show you guys how this sort of would work. Basically speaking, I'm just going to look at the one hit, so the first number that you would have seen right here, the 706 one, just for demonstration purposes. So how do we actually go about calculating things? Well, first of all, we need Kokomi stats, like as they're sort of given right here. We need her talent levels, and obviously we need Narit's ascension, as well as the enemy's resistance and defense. If you're not familiar with what resistance and defense means, it's basically just two values that you multiply in, and this will reduce the damage that you're going to do to enemies. If you want to find out more information, go onto the Genshin Impact wiki, read up resistance. There's the actual formulas that I'm also using in game and so on. You can see here this is the defense multiplier. The point is we can actually do the calculation. So for those of you that want to follow along, there is the formula. I've sort of just broken it up very, very carefully. A lot of people meme about flat attack, but in certain cases you could argue that flat attack could be valuable, but for most characters probably not. But there it is. You can see here Kokomi's attack, the weapon, the attack percentage modifiers, the flat attack, and then obviously the artifact. All of these things multiplied by her talent level, so that's kind of cool. So the next one is obviously the Narit's ascension, so her elemental burst. So elemental burst says 8.71% of your max HP, and that gives us about 3,200 attack. Now this is one thing a lot of people didn't actually know unless you see it in game, or sort of see it in the calculations. But Kokomi's passive, the Song of Pearls, basically this ascension passive right here gives her more a sort of attack based off of her healing bonus. So this is why you want to run your Kokomi with a healing bonus circlet. So basically you take 15% of your healing bonus, in this case 85%, and you multiply that by your attack, and then you add that to the damage that you're going to do. In other words, half of Kokomi's damage in this case here comes from her Song of Pearls passive. Very, very powerful. And obviously Everlasting Moonglow gives us a slight little 1% of our max HP bump up. So this is the total damage that Kokomi would have done. You can see it's about 9,700 there at the bottom. And now what we need to do is we need to add the hydro damage bonus that we've got here. And if we are using Yelan's passive, this is where we add it. And this is the important thing. We don't multiply the big numbers by Yelan's passive. We add the damage bonus to all of our other damage bonuses, and then we multiply through. And immediately you can now understand why sort of Yelan's will give you less than what we sort of calculated earlier in the spreadsheet. So once you do this correctly, and let me just quickly add it on here, and you assume about 8 stacks, so 8 stacks is about on average 29%, you'll see that the total damage bonus is about at 204%. So now you take all of these guys, you can see in the sort of equation, you sum up all of these, and then you just multiply by your damage bonus, your crit rate, in which in this case it's just simple. We just sort of said it's just going to be a modifier of 1, multiplied by the enemy's resistance and the enemy's defense, and there you go. There is sort of a damage calculation, and we can confirm this damage calculation 8981 from the calculator, exactly what we got in the spreadsheet, barring some rounding errors. So the question we're now going to ask is, what was the actual benefit that Yelan gave us? So assuming no Yelan, this is the number, and the final number with Yelan assuming 8 stacks was about this. This of course is just based off of what we would sort of expect you would get on average. And you can see here the damage utilization is 29%, so this is the damage ramp bonus, but the effective number that we've gotten is actually just sort of, well, the no Yelan damage bonus divided by the total damage bonus, including like your hydro damage bonus, etc., etc. And this will mean that Yelan effectively only increased our damage by 16%. In fact, you also get this exact same number if you just sort of divide out the totals, and well, this is just basic maths because all of them add up sort of geometrically, sorry. And yeah, if you then wanted to work out a deflation factor, this would be it. So basically, how much of the sort of number that you saw on screen or that you'd expect to get, in other words, the average 25% damage bonus of Yelan, how do you adjust this number to actually give you an accurate indication? And this deflation factor is about 57%. In other words, if you expect, based on how you're going to play, that your Yelan should give you 26% damage bonus, then the actual value that she's going to provide you multiplied by 0.757 will be about 16%. Now, very interestingly, if we went, and you can see in my sort of Yelan calculations, I use the actual combat data and so on. So what Yelan provided for Kokomi in this case, again, there's just slight approximations here and there, is about an effective 23.83% damage bonus, what we would calculate theoretically. But if I had to do the in-game sort of calculations based off of it, you'll see that our effective damage utilization is only about 13.59. And yeah, this is barring the sort of slight differences between the in-game sort of syncing and what we sort of put on a spreadsheet. You can see it is pretty close to what we sort of experienced in game. But basically, there is something that is kind of hidden here, and that is that the deflation factor is kind of constant. In fact, your deflation factor that you would have to apply to Yelan's damage bonus in order to get what her actual contribution is will always be 1 over the sum of all of your other damage bonuses. Now, for those of you that are interested, it's a pretty simple calculation to do. You just sort of here assume that this is Yelan's sort of damage bonus, and this is the sum of all of your other damage bonuses. This is the quick calculation for your deflation factor. Doing a bit of algebra, you can see, well, the deflation factor is only a function of y. In other words, your hydro damage and the sum of any other damage bonuses that you've got. So therefore, your deflation factor is 1 over 1 plus y, and that is 57%. So what this means is that if I had expected Yelan to give me 25.5%, then if I multiply this by that deflation factor, I will get the correct, or like the accurate sort of effective use of Yelan's sort of bonus. In this case, 13.5%. And for those of you that saw my sort of simulations and so on, all you need to do with the simulations is you just multiply them by this sort of deflation factor, and there you go. There you can see the little graph. This is the new graph, and this is the actual value that Yelan's passive will provide for you. So yeah, that is very interesting to sort of see it. And that is what I wanted to cover, to sort of show you guys with an in-game example, using some in-game footage, using a theoretical calculator, as well as stepping through the calculations bit by bit, how Yelan can actually increase Kokomi's damage. And you can do this for any other character. Obviously, once you start using crit rate and crit damage, you would have to either simulate it, or you would have to run a sort of expected number and so on. And this is the power of running simulations, the power of having a calculation engine of some sort, because once you start doing this in spreadsheets of multiple characters and artifacts and so on, having to adjust it manually one by one is just a colossal waste of time. So building a proper tool, and then hopefully in the future adding a proper stochastic framework onto it, can give you so much better information. And I think this is my final conclusion. In Genshin Impact, what we're given and what we are told by the developers and the and Hoyoverse is not the full truth. You have to really dig into the maths to find the full truth. And in this case, you can now properly start evaluating what does it mean if I go for, let's say, a C4 constellation. In this case, we can answer the question pretty simply. Let's just activate C4, and hey, there you go. My Kokomi's damage is increased from the 8,900 to about 10,000. That's so much better, so much easier to answer than trying to go through all the calculations again. So hopefully you guys do appreciate the power of having a proper tool and not just relying on stupid spreadsheets, but having a proper tool and then being able to expand these sorts of tools. But yeah, that has been Yelan and Kokomi, and this has been an in-depth dive. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section. Cheers.